The sun once went around the earth, according to the Holy Church, which helped to reassure people that they were the center of the universe. One day His Holiness the Pope met a man with a telescope and said, "Hey, Mr. Galilei, what does your spyglass say?" And the scientist spoke. He said, "It's really quite amazing, entirely life-changing. So let me ask before I show you, do you really want to know? Oh, do you really want to know? Oh, Emma read the Bible for direction. She said she was a child of heaven, and that the human race came from a higher place, from the angels descended. She wound up marrying her cousin. He was a thinker of a husband, lost and thought she'd find him. Say, "Charlie, what you writing?" Darwin looked up and said, "It's really quite amazing, entirely life-changing. So let me ask before I show you, do you really want to know? Oh, do you really want to know? Oh, do you really want to let knowledge like a breeze in through the door of your belief, go through the rooms and the corridors, knock cherished heirlooms to the floor. That wind can raise the roof sometimes and leave you blinking at the sky. So if you stare into this glass, beware that there's no going back. You'll say sunrise, but it will refuse. Instead, the earth itself will move and spin you round from dawn to dawn into the wonder of it
Good morning. Did that wake you up? Kind of startled me. Welcome to All Souls. My name is Barbara Gerald. I'm the pastor here. I like to start off by asking if there's anyone here who would be uncomfortable if the speakers here in the pulpit took their masks off. If you'd rather we not, would you please raise your hand? Okay, thank you. It's easier to watch people do a presentation if you can actually see their mouths move. Now, there's something, we've been keeping them on to sing, and I didn't know if the song leaders up here, if you would rather they keep their masks on. Anybody want a mask on for the song leader? Okay, all right, thank you. So I'll leave it on. And this is a church based on covenant, not creed. We covenant around some principles of how we are going to be in this world and how we're going to be with each other, striving to be respectful of people with differing paths and opinions. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's our challenge and it's our covenant. And so whoever you are, if you care to be here with us You are welcome. No matter what your identity or orientation or history or background or status or ability, you're always welcome here. We front load the service with a little bit of information, and for that, I'm going to invite our board person of the day, Jennifer Russell, to give you some information.
Good morning. It's good to see you all. Our volunteer of the month for August is Amanda Lawrence, who's here today. Amanda, Susan coined the term, I think, but has been known as the potluck goddess, which she is. She really has a gift for hospitality and making people feel welcome and having fun and cooking and eating. Has done a lot of that for us here at the church. She's served on the board, worship committee. She finds a great way to integrate faith and science into sermons, which the nerd in me just loves. So thank you, Amanda. Our Give Away the Plate recipient for the month of August is Basic Necessities. They are a nonprofit organization here locally that collects diapers, period products, and incontinence products. Those things can be very cost prohibitive for families and people in need of those. So anything that comes in this month that is not designated as a pledge will go to Give Away the Plate to them. Next week on the 28th, we're having our water communion service. If you haven't been to one of those before, it's where we kind of come back together at the end of the summer when people are scattered different places. We have a ritual and a ceremony where people bring water from some kind of special moment or story from your summer. It can be somewhere you've traveled. It can be to mark some kind of event in your life or in the life of your family. It can be from your kitchen sink. Just whatever is meaningful to you. If you don't have your water or you forget your water, we'll have some for you to use. We combine all of that water in a ritual, and then it is boiled and purified and used for non-drinking rituals throughout the year. If someone doesn't throw it away out of the freezer. And after that service, that'll be at our 11 o'clock service next week. Right after that service from 12:30 to 3:30, we are having a swim party and potluck at the home of Kathy Osage and Mike Roberts. The address will be available online if you don't know where they live, or at church next week, so you'll be able to find your way. So please join us for that. And after service today, just a few minutes after the service ends, we're going to have a newcomer session where you can learn about our Unitarian Universalist tradition. You can also learn about this congregation, get information on how to join if that's something you're interested in learning about. It'll be in the high school room, which is down the hall on your right. It's the room with all the couches. So good morning and welcome.
Oh, so in Children and Youth RE, and they are still painting the mural today. They'll be working on that off and on over the next few weeks. And, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. And in adult religious education, we took a break this morning, but we will be back 9 a.m. next week. We'll be looking at the history of the UUA in terms of LGBTQ work, the movement, the quest for LGBTQ rights. And so hope you will join us for that. And we are starting regular religious education classes on September the 4th. And on September the 18th, we're having a homecoming service that will include a blessing of the backpacks. So we hope to start getting more of our kids back for that. And we'll be getting more information in various ways about that out to everybody. And I believe that is all I have. Thank you. Do you want to come back? Am I doing this one? When is it? Not yet. I'll invite you now to join me in the spirit of worship. And And after I ring the chime and we settle in, we will sing Gathered Here. I think the words will be on the screen, or it's number 389 in the gray hymnal if you prefer that. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power. Spirit, draw near. Let's do it one more time. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power. Spirit, draw near. We are called to worship this morning by the words of Michael Walzer from a book called Exodus and Revolution. We still believe, or many of us do, what the Exodus first taught about the meaning and possibility of politics and about its proper form. First, that wherever you live, it is probably Egypt. Second, that there is a better place, a world more attractive, a promised land. And third, that the way to the land is through the wilderness. There is no way to get from here to there except by joining together and marching. Ava Kate and Jackson, would you like to help us lead the first chalice lighting? This chalice to celebrate Unitarian Universalism. This is the church of the open mind. This is the church of the helping hands. This is the church of the loving heart. Together, with mind, hands, and heart, we care for the earth and for each other. Thank you. Light. Nice. Thank you. Good job. Thank you. In the light of this chalice this morning are the words of Matthew Stewart. The best illustration of the power and impact of America's original philosophical radicalism may be discovered in the first sentence of the nation's first founding document. Many historians take for granted that the reference in the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, the laws of nature and nature's God, amounts to a gesture of conventional piety, and no doubt it was written partly to be read that way. Religious conservatives routinely use it as proof that this is a Christian nation, that we govern ourselves through acts of faith, that all authority must rest on the assertion of belief in some higher authority, and that all would be well if we would simply return to the simple faith of our fathers. Yet nature's God properly belongs to the radical philosophical religion of deism. And here I part company a little bit with Mr. Stewart because he maintains that the phrase refers to nothing we commonly mean by the term God, but rather something close to nature. And I feel he is limiting the possibilities of God when he makes that distinction. So I also want to tell you that this book called Nature's God is one of my favorite kind of books because I find so much that resonates, and I also find things I can wrestle with like that. So you're going to hear more about that book today, and I hope that you will want to read it. But he does say, and I do take his point, the radical philosophy of America's founders remains the best way to explain the persistence, the power, and the prosperity of the modern liberal order around this world to this day. It tells us that we are and always have been the source of our own authority, and to believe otherwise is to construct the conditions of our own servitude. With that, I would ask you to join me in our unison affirmation. The words will be on the screen. You can rise in body or spirit. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the sacred. Thus do we covenant with each other. Our opening song, Barbara, is a song that Barbara wrote. We Are on a Journey, a song about that takes into account 7 of our Unitarian Universalist principles.
I guess I have to write in.
You have to write a new verse, huh, for the 8th one? Yeah.
These were originally written for the children, and they had like 6 weeks to learn the song, and then they would sing it with the congregation. But this one was for UU identity. Is that too loud? We are on a journey, still together here we stand, tall and proud to be the voice of freedom in our land, where every person matters, where each vote counts the same. We search for truth in history, our own minds and discovery. We are on a journey, the universal quest, the Church of Unitarian, Universalist. We are on a journey, still in fairness we unite, for justice and compassion for each human that's alive, accepting each one's different, respecting nature's web that keeps us all together. So we value every breath. We are on a journey, the universal quest, the Church of Unitarian, Universalist.
Thank you, Barbara. We have a real treasure in you, especially over these months of COVID when we're all virtual and as we are part virtual. Barbara has allowed us the use of so much of her original music, whether she's played it live or because of the copyright issues. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And because it's wonderful music, okay, but also but yeah, we have been limited as to what we can use. Anyway, for our story this morning, I want to tell you about 2 men who were very important to the founding of our nation. One of them you may have heard of, but maybe not heard a lot of, and the other one maybe you haven't. So it was a warm summer Sunday in Salisbury, Connecticut in 1764. And Ethan Allen sat in a chair. Anybody heard of Ethan Allen, right? He sat in a chair in the muddy town square in the middle of the town. He was shirtless and cursing up a storm for the crowd as they began to gather, and they were, quite amused by this whole situation. His friend, Dr. Thomas Young, took a lancet, a sharp surgical tool. I should tell you that this may be a little grittier than our usual time for all ages, just so you know. It may be a little gory in spots, but not too bad. Anyway, he took his lancet, his sharp surgical tool, and he made an incision in Ethan Allen's arm. And then he put into the incision, he took a thread that had been soaked in the sores of someone who had this deadly disease called smallpox. I know, I see your faces. He took this thread, he implanted it into the incision, and he sewed up the cut. That was, you know what that was, right? You know what he was doing, right? Well, he was vaccinating, exactly. Now, smallpox was a horrible, deadly disease, and I don't want you to get that confused now. You're probably hearing a lot about monkeypox. Monkeypox is painful and awful and a real, annoyance. Smallpox was deadly, and it had killed many more people than all of the guns and bayonets you can think of. And vaccination at that time amounted to this deliberate infection of someone with a healthy person with material from a diseased person in order that they might also get the antibodies that person was building up. And it was very crude, kind of gross, but it worked. Or at least most of the time it worked. I'd say 2 or 3 out of 100 might kind of develop a full-blown case of smallpox and, the little complication of death. But when you consider that 1 out of 3 who got smallpox were going to die, vaccination was really your best bet. So I know you won't believe this, but vaccination was the object of fierce scorn among some religious conservatives. I know, what? The Reverend Timothy Dwight allegedly sermonized that if death by disease was in the cards for any certain person, then vaccination, the trick of vaccination, he called it, was just interfering with God's business. And legally, in many jurisdictions, the decision of whether or not to allow vaccinations rested with what they call the select men, kind of like the city council. It was a group of 3 to 5 men, always men, who ran the town, and he would decide whether or not they were going to allow vaccinations in the town. In Salisbury, vaccinations had already been outlawed, so of course, Ethan Allen and his friend Thomas Young were bound and determined to do this in public where everyone could see. Ethan Allen had a history already in the local courthouse. He had been hauled in numerous times on charges of blasphemy, which is when you have said something against God. There used to be that people would arrest you for something like that if you said something against God or if you said something against the particular religion that was in favor in that town or whatever. And so he already had a very familiar relationship with the courthouse. So the selectmen heard that this vaccination had happened, and they went looking for the vaccination party. And by the time they got to the town square, they heard that the party had moved on to the local tavern. And in accordance with the medical practices of the time, the patient had taken a few shots of rum by then. And by the time the town bosses got to the tavern, well, Thomas Young was nowhere to be found. He must have remembered that he had a very important house call in another town. But Ethan Allen was there, cursing up a storm, yelling at the selectmen. They hauled him into court. And I should tell you that 2 of the selectmen, one of them was a man named, and now I have to look at my notes, a man named Lee. And he was related to Reverend Dwight, and also just a very powerful man. And the other man was a cousin of Ethan Allen's, who was very familiar with his problem with authorities. So there already was kind of some contention in the relationship there. And at one point in court, Ethan Allen swears an oath. He says, "By Jesus Christ, I wish I may be bound down in hell with old Beelzebub 1,000 years in the lowest pit, and every little insipid devil that comes along and asks the reason of Allen's lying there. It should be said that he made a promise that he would have satisfaction of Leon Stoddard, and he did not fulfill it." Well, in court, believe it or not, he got acquitted. He got acquitted because he maintained that his oath was only hypothetical, that if he didn't get the best of Leon Stoddard, then he was wanting to go to hell and wishing, everybody to go to hell or whatever. And they said, oh, and they actually let him go. But of course, it did nothing for his reputation. And later, he would also make a name for himself promoting deism, his deist religious beliefs. And so we think we get this version of history where our heroes tend to be so kind of bland and uncomplicated, and we should be able to look at, warts and all. We should be able to look at the whole personality. And so I wanted you just to know a little bit about Ethan Allen and his friend, Dr. Young, this morning. So you want to go do some painting? All right. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. I invite you now to sit back in the pew. Feel yourself kind of sink into the pew. You can close your eyes if you like. And join me in the spirit of prayer. Source and spirit of all life, known by many names, we pray to remember that we gain nothing by limiting you to a box, never mind the shape or depth or uniqueness of the box. May we open our eyes to the wonders right outside our window and to the wonders in this room, behind the eyes of everyone here. The vast spectrum of wisdom, the power to reason, the wealth of knowledge that includes the knowledge of all we don't know that we don't know. May we remain curious, humble, and teachable in the light of our limitations, and grateful in the light of our gifts. May we hold in our hearts the lessons of Rabbi Simcha Bunim, remembering that we are but dust and ashes, and that for our sake the world was created. And now may we carry that contemplation into the silence.
When I was a boy, each week on Sunday we would go to church and pay attention to the priest. He would read the holy word and consecrate the holy bread, and everyone would kneel and bow. Today the only difference is everything is holy now. Everything is holy now. And when I was in Sunday school, we would learn about the time Moses split the sea in two, and Jesus made the water wine. And I remember feeling sad. Miracles don't happen still. Now I can't keep track, 'cause everything's a miracle. Everything's a miracle. Wine from water is not so small, but an even better magic trick. Said anything is here at all. So the challenging thing becomes not to look for miracles, but finding where there isn't one. When holy water was rare at best, it barely wet my fingertips. But now I have to hold my breath like I'm swimming in a sea of it. It used to be a world half there, heaven's second-rate hand-me-down. But I walk it with the reverend air, 'cause everything is holy now. Read a questioning child's face, say it's not a testament. That'd be very hard to say. See another new morning come, say it's not a sacrament. I tell you that it can't be done. This morning outside I stood, I saw a little red-winged bird shining like a burning bush and singing like a scripture verse. It made me want to bow my head. I remember when church let out, how things have changed since then. Everything is holy now. It used to be a world half there, heaven's second-rate hand-me-down. But I walk it with a reverend air, 'cause everything is holy now.
That was Peter Mayer, who is a Unitarian Universalist singer-songwriter who also gave all our congregations permission to use his music during this time. And so, we really just appreciate when people will share their talents and their gifts that way. I wanted to deal with this topic this week because of a number of recent events. The Supreme Court ruling on the coach praying on the 50-yard line in Washington State, the unabashed Christian Dominionist candidate for governor of Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriano, and the likes of people like Lauren Boebert bringing back that old trope that separation of church and state really isn't even in the Constitution, never mind that it's top of the charts on the Bill of Rights. And then there are the people who keep saying the founders were all Christian and they founded this as a Christian nation. Not to mention CPAC's fawning over the Hungarian president Viktor Orban and his vision of a white Christian nation. And then recently I saw on the news a really chilling profile of what teacher training looks like this year in Florida. I don't know if anybody else happened to see that, but it's really just between all the, these were our Christian values and well, maybe they had slaves, but they spoke out against slavery. I mean, kind of wanting to just gloss over, and I don't think that does us any favors. I want to say, too, very quickly that this is not about bashing Christianity, okay? Christianity is a part of our Unitarian Universalist tradition. We came out of the early Christian church, and a lot of UUs identify as Christian. So that's not what this is about. This is about claiming a state religion and how I see that happening. So I just want you to understand that distinction. So, okay, now I really am back on, Brittany. All of these events brought back to mind a book that we read in adult religious education way back in 2014 called Nature's God, The Heretical Origins of the American Republic by Matthew Stewart. Stewart maintains that the claim that the United States is a Christian nation is simply not true, or at least it's complexly not true. Yes, the founders were nominally Christian, and many of them were associated with churches and very active in their churches, but their brand of Christianity was a far cry from the fundamentalism promoted by the Lauren Boeberts of today. So the name of the book comes straight out of the Declaration of Independence, which in the very first paragraph refers to the laws of nature and nature's God. And while this and other references to God have been used by the Christian nation defenders as evidence of their argument, Stewart presents evidence to the contrary, arguing that the theological and philosophical ideas of most of the founders at the time were much closer to deism. And we're going to try and crack that open a little bit more as we go along. But first I want to get back to Ethan Allen. Matthew Stewart actually got the idea for this book when he found an old, nearly forgotten book by Ethan Allen entitled The Oracle of Reason, or its true short and pithy title, Reason, the only oracle of man, or a compendious system of natural religion, alternately adorned with confutations of a variety of doctrines incompatible to it, deduced from the most exalted ideas which we are able to form of the divine and human characters, and from the universe in general. You know, nothing like a catchy title that just rolls right off. People know Ethan Allen as the guy who founded the state of Vermont, although statehood would not be granted until after his death. But he led the rebellion of the Green Mountain Boys against the land developers in New York. He almost made it as an iron magnate before he almost made it as a land developer, before he became really one of the early heroes of the Revolutionary War, leading the siege on Fort Ticonderoga. He was the first celebrity POW of the American Revolution, as he was held in Britain for 2 years during the war, and no, he never made furniture. That's the one thing he actually never did. That was two brothers from New York who wanted an all-American name for their fledgling furniture business, which will get funnier to you as you hear more about Ethan Allen. Very few people, though, had ever read his book, and the ones who had read it pronounced it too bad to bother. Not only did they think it was bad, they were apparently sure that Ethan Allen didn't write it. So double insult, right? Your book is terrible, and you're too dumb to have written even that terrible book. They assumed he studied with his friend, Dr. Thomas Young, the man in the story earlier that vaccinated him, and that Thomas Young had taught him all about philosophy. And Thomas Young also had a great disdain for organized religion. Ethan Allen was asked why he wrote the book, and he said basically the Pope is raking in millions, the Protestant clergy is raking in almost as much, and they have to portray humankind as damnable and depraved in order to keep their jobs. And this made him mad. And he said his aim was to remedy the human species from this ghostly tyranny. And those words will come back a little bit later. But he stated further that his friends called him a deist, which he never disputed. Being conscious I am no Christian, except mere infant baptism makes me one. Now, I would argue that deism at the time, or deism as practiced by the founders, was a form of Christianity, and that they, probably others did consider themselves Christian as opposed to not. But for his trouble in writing this book, the more traditional clergy raked him over the coals and assumed that Satan would later finish the job for them. His book also really complicated what could have been an easy life after the revolution. People were looking for these uncomplicated heroes, and that's kind of how he got a historical lobotomy, really, you know? Leaving this hardy mountain man image, which he also cultivated. He told the story of writing this book as it was just him alone with a Bible, a dictionary, and his mountain cabin, and a bottle of whiskey, and these are all my ideas, except that when people read the book, they found there were ideas from British deists, there were ideas from ancient philosophers, there were things that kept coming up in the book, but they said, Ethan, you're not that smart. But they did think that probably, and some people think he didn't even write the book at all, but other people think more likely he was taught by Thomas Young. He wrote it based off of conversations that he had with his friend Thomas Young, and we'll talk more about Thomas Young now. So what we know about Thomas Young, first of all, who's ever heard of Thomas Young? Right? And you're not a bad student of history if you haven't heard of Thomas Young, because he was so instrumental and yet one of the most probably important unsung heroes. What we know of Thomas Young is that he was an instigator of the Boston Tea Party. In fact, he was the only one in the operation who didn't dress up like an Indian. He instead delivered a satirical speech on the ill effects of tea on the Constitution over at the Old South Church while all his friends dumped the tea into the harbor. Where many of the better-known founders were really pretty comfortable starting out as British subjects and kind of had to be brought around, kind of were moved by their times to become revolutionaries, Young was the real deal from the beginning. And he was probably the main force in bringing a lot of them around. He published his first tract against British rule in 1764. He joined the Boston Committee of Correspondence in 1772, and they went around spreading revolutionary propaganda and democratic principles. They organized. They were organizers. Young arrived in Boston in 1775, started hanging out with Thomas Paine. Later, Thomas Paine's common sense would kind of reflect a lot of the writings that Young had done before. They took over the government of Pennsylvania with a pro-independence faction, and from there they tipped the balance of the Continental Congress so that within 6 weeks, Congress declared independence in July of that year, as we all know, right? And then in that summer and fall of 1776, he was part of the Constitutional Convention of Pennsylvania, and there's a Declaration of Rights in that document that much of which is his work, and we would, of course, later find echoes of that in our own Bill of Rights. He did all this despite, initially, independence was not, as I said, a popular idea. A lot of people would be willing, at first, were willing to endure the status quo. You know, we've all heard the story about the Israelites that wished they'd stayed in Egypt. You know, it was the hell that they knew. So why does he remain unquestionably the most unwritten about man of distinction of the American Revolution? 3 main reasons. He died too soon, he died broke, and his family needed to sell off much of his massive book collection to pay their bills, and he was a deist. And he was not only a deist, but a loud and unapologetic one. His plans seemed to include not only independence of the state, but independence of people from what he called, and I quote, the ghostly tyranny of organized religion. So what is deism? This is going to be a completely oversimplified crash course. According to the World Union of Deists, deism is a knowledge of God based on the application of our reason on the designs and laws found throughout nature. Deism is therefore a natural religion and not a revealed religion. And so in tracing the roots of deism and the influences on the founders, Stewart in the book goes way into the weeds, which I'm only going to go just a little into the weeds right now, really quickly. But he starts with the influence of the philosopher John Locke on the founders, which is pretty accepted. Locke expressed deist ideas, but he always kind of tried to color within the lines. He tried to keep them within the bounds of Christianity. And he would bring in Paul's reference to the God in which we live and move and have our being, and that to him was nature's God. Stewart keeps digging, though, and he shows how Locke was more influenced by Spinoza than Locke would ever have wanted to admit, and Spinoza was closer to the more pantheistic idea that God and nature are one. And then both of them show influences that go all the way back to the martyred heretic monk Giordano Bruno, who was influenced, and he was burned at the stake for, among other reasons, saying that the earth was not at the center of the universe. He was influenced by the poet Lucretius, who in turn was trying to explain the philosophy of Epicurus. And so, so it goes back and back and back. But two of the most immediate influences on Young and Allen, and to a great extent the rest of the founders, were a man named Lord Bolingbroke, who was excited by the idea of God as nature and by the endless possibilities of an infinite universe. We talked, and Barbara Deger's going to be up here in a little bit. We've been doing this adult religious education together. But a lot of our founders and these deists from Britain were very fascinated with the idea that now that we know it's an infinite universe, there could be infinite life forms. There could be other civilizations. And Bolingbroke asked the question, where is heaven and where is hell for every planet and every system? And, he didn't find the question much of a bother. He said, the world that philosophy has opened gives ample room for all the planetary inhabitants. And they were also really influenced by Alexander Pope and a poem that he wrote called The Essay on Man. So I want to just to get to some of the better known founders and just give you a few quotes. I'm not going to read everything, and I can give you access to the slides after this. But Thomas Jefferson quoted Bolingbroke and the deists in the notebooks where he transcribed quotes that he wanted to remember. And he was asked specifically if he thought that Christianity was a part of the common law. And he said, "We may safely affirm, though contradicted by all the judges and writers on earth, that Christianity neither is nor ever was a part of the common law." And his reasoning, he said, is that the British democratic institutions predated the Norman conquest when the Britons were not yet Christians and wouldn't have known who Jesus was. So he thought the later connection of church to state in England was actually the result of a 14th century French typo, where the word that was supposed to be ancient scripture turned into holy scripture, and that's how it happened. So, and Jefferson also cut and pasted his own version of the Gospels to tell the life and teachings of Jesus without the miracle stories. Adams was destined for a career in ministry, but it horrified him, and so he went into the law instead. He was raised in a congregational church, but ultimately became a Unitarian. He's one of our 5 Unitarian presidents. Benjamin Franklin referred to this British series of lectures, Boyle's lectures, that were meant to defend Orthodox Christianity, and he said they had the opposite effect on him. And at 12, apparently, Franklin urged his father just to say his prayers over a barrel of beef rather than go through that at every meal. So kind of a little skeptical from an early age. Thomas Paine said he was 7 or 8 when he heard a traditional preacher, as he said, making God Almighty act like a passionate man that killed his own when he could not revenge himself any other way. As I was sure a man would be hanged if he did such a thing, I could not see for what purpose they preached such sermons. And this sounds a lot like the later Universalist Hosea Ballou would say very much the same thing. And finally, George Washington, was probably the most adept at kind of keeping quiet and walking the fine line and saying things that could be interpreted one way or the other. But his own minister did say that he thought that he was pretty sure that Washington also was a deist, or at least had deist leanings. So with all this rich history available to us, who is perpetuating the myth of the United States as a Christian nation, and why? Well, for one thing, those who identify with this movement really don't want our own rich history to be available to us. We've proven that in numerous, history bills that are in legislatures all over the country. They prefer the kind of history that would lobotomize Ethan Allen, even as they criminalize parents of trans kids and teachers of real history, instead of the literally whitewashed version that they espouse. So first, what exactly are we talking about when we say Christian nationalism? And I think the type on that slide is probably going to be too small because we used it in a class that was online and I forgot to adjust it. But it's a cultural framework and ideology containing symbols and principles and narratives and traditions that dramatize the values held dear by its adherents. It idealizes and advocates for a fusion of a particular kind of Christianity with American civic life, including a strong sense of moral traditionalism, especially around issues of gender and sexuality, and we're seeing that again in all these legislations. Comfort with authoritarian social control, desire for strict boundaries around national identity, civic participation and a sense of belonging, who's in and who's out, and that often falls along racial and cultural lines, and a general understanding that white natural-born citizens are held up as the ideal and everyone else comes after. And we see that now with people talking about replacement theory and all of that kind of thing. We see it all over the place. And so, I mentioned earlier the gubernatorial candidate in Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriano, who's been a longtime associate of Andrew Torba, the CEO of the right-wing social media site Gab, who has called for a conservative movement to be exclusively Christian, saying they don't want Jews and atheists or anyone else who isn't a certain brand of Christian. We won't deport you, he says, but you'll enjoy the fruits of living in a Christian nation. These so-called fruits include massive amounts of legislation, like the Don't Say Gay bills and other anti-LGBTQ and anti-trans legislation in numerous states. They including our own, they include the forced birth movement and numerous bills to stop the teaching of accurate and truthful history in public schools. The wording of the bills has sometimes been so boilerplate they don't even remember to change the state. And so, as we've seen, the Supreme Court also promises little to no relief. Our founders, as problematic as they were in so many ways, and they were, devised in the Constitution a living document that could grow and change with us, helping us to do better as we know better, and fully acknowledging the great diversity and plurality that is the United States. We need to know our history, warts and all, and yet also beauty and all. We need to know all that good stuff, all that good and different and diverse stuff that is in there. So now I want to turn it over to Barbara Deger, who's going to send us out on a hopeful note.
Thank you, Susan. Susan did such a good job today, and yeah, I think another round of applause is needed. And yes, I really thought it was cool that our forefathers believed in space aliens. That was the part that I just really could get into, but my part today is to leave you with a little hope. And I wanted to start out with a quote from Emily Dickinson, who wrote, "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all." So this morning at 6 o'clock, I decided I wanted to have some kind of a visual with that, and I text my daughter, "Do you happen to have a feathered boa?" She didn't, so that's why I don't have, but my job today is to spread a few feathers in your direction. So the Pew Research Center, pretty renowned for its surveys, surveyed over 12,000 adults in the first week of March of 2021. And they didn't ask any of the participants about Christian nationalism, but rather asked them about attitudes that would be indicative of Christian nationalist beliefs. And it's not quite as bad as you might think. Pew found that 54% of Americans believe the federal government should enforce separation of church and state, as compared with 19% who believe that the federal government should stop doing that and be integrated with Christianity. Now, that leaves a pretty large percent, does it not? But those were going to be marked with either don't have an opinion or don't feel like I know enough about it. Now, if you would just take, and for some reason I focused here on Republicans, the question about separation of church and state, even among Republicans, 58% felt that it needed to be separate. So support for separation of church and state is slightly higher among men than women. It is higher among college graduates than those with lower levels of education. It is higher with young adults, ages 18 to 29. They're much more likely to think there needs to be a separation of church and state. Support for separation of church and state is a little lower in the South, all right, than other parts of the country. Still, even in the South, fewer than 20% of the respondents consistently expressed a desire for integrating church and state. So a lot of people in our country feel that separation of church and state is important. Now, in other questions about the Constitution and America's relationship to Christianity revealed even higher levels of support for church and state separation. So, for example, nearly 70% of United States adults said the federal government should never declare an official religion in the country, 70%. And just 15% said the government should declare the United States as a Christian nation. And the breakdown for that, white evangelicals, only 35%, Protestants, 24%, Catholics, only 12%, unaffiliated, 3%, Jews, 1%, for the breakdown on that. So another cornerstone of Christian nationalism is the belief that the Constitution is divinely inspired. Pew surveyed showed that only 18% of Americans felt that it reflects God's vision for America, and over 2/3 of U.S. adults feel that the Constitution was written by humans and reflect their vision. If you do have an interest in looking at the very detailed survey results, you can, I think Steve put it on the chat online. You can also just type in Pew Research on white nationalism or Pew Research on separation of church and state. And again, they have a much more intense breakdown or analysis of this data. So my mission today was to give you a few feathers of hope. And I will close with this quote from the Reverend Martin Luther King. We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And it's been just a joy to work with Barbara with the adult religious education. It's been a fun time. Our closing hymn is Forward Through the Ages, which Barbara and I were talking this week and decided this hymn is kind of an auditory Rorschach test. And when you hear the tune, you might understand why I say that. But anyway, if you'll rise in body or spirit, the words will be on the screen, or it's 114. Oh, that's right. The third verse will be different in the hymnal. So yeah, read the screen. interesting this week. We read a comment thread online about it and how some people were just, this tune was redeemed for me with these new words, and other people were just, nope, can't do it, can't do it. So anyway, I wanted to tell y'all really briefly that Melissa Gibson, who is actually still a member of this congregation, she keeps the covenant with us, but she is a seminary student at Stark King School of the Ministry in California, and she lives in Omaha, because that's the way we can do things these days. She is preaching this morning at the church in Omaha where she works as membership director. And so, yes. So, first of all, I'm thankful to y'all for coming here instead of staying home and listening to Melissa live. But I do want you to find the recording, and I'm going to find it and post it on our church Facebook page as well. Our closing words, first of all, from Valerie Carr. In the United States, white supremacy is intertwined with Christian supremacy, one an extension of the other. Any theology that teaches that God will torture the people in front of you in the afterlife creates the imaginative space for you to do so yourself on earth. And finally, from Abraham Lincoln, our reliance is in our love for liberty. Our defense is in the spirit which prizes liberty as the heritage of all people in all lands everywhere. Destroy this spirit, and we have planted the seeds of despotism at our own doors. Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves and cannot long retain it. Why should there not be a patient confidence in the ultimate justice of the people? Is there any better or equal hope in the world? Let us have faith that right makes might, and in that faith, let us to the end dare to do our duty as we understand it. Thank y'all. Blessed be. Namaste. Go in peace.
Way back when they said all men,
name it every wealthy European male.
So back then to vote required being white and being rich and being male. They said you can't vote if you got no property. You can't vote if you're not free. You can't vote if you are a woman, 'cause you got no stake in democracy. Year by year, people have to ponder what the Declaration must have meant. By all men, clearly it was time for an electoral adjustment. And they won the vote for those who had no property. Won the vote for those who'd been free. Won the vote for women, and they wrote it down, it was guaranteed. They all said it's my vote, you can't deny it. My voice can't take it away. My right, I won't be quiet. It's my vote, my voice, my right. My vote, my voice, my right. Well, the rights are right, but without a fight it can evaporate and float away. And by night, people came a-creeping and they tried to take the vote away. They said, you can't vote, you haven't paid the poll tax. You can't vote, you can't pass the exam. You can't vote for fear of retribution. And the people stood up and said, well, damn, it's my vote. You can't deny it. My voice can't take it away. My right, I won't be quiet. It's my vote, my voice, my right. My vote, my vote, my voice, my right. 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 So my friends, make yourself a plan to cast your ballot, 'cause you got to vote. And beware, always in the shadows, there are those who want you not to vote. They say you can't vote, they're throwing away your ballot. You can't vote, they're purging the rolls. You can't vote, they took away your mailbox. You can't vote, they're rigging the courts. Say you're gonna use it, say you'll never lose it. And if they ask you whose it is, just say it's